Hi there, ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls. We have a tremendous wrestling card for you today here on All-Star Championship Wrestling, which, of course, features the world's greatest wrestlers.
My little itty-bitty bruiser buddies.
United States heavyweight champion, Brazil. The world's heavyweight champion from the AWA, Nick Bockwinkel.
The Midwest supporting, bruiser loving, positivity spreading, world's most dangerous podcast. Join former pro wrestler and promoter Dave Dynasty as he supports and promotes Midwest pro wrestling. Keep on growing with the Midwest Express. This is the Dave Dynasty Show.
Greetings and welcome to the Dave Dynasty Show. I am your host, Dave Dynasty. Thank you for joining us. We are available on all podcast platforms, including now we are on Spotify. So if you are a Spotify user, you can now find the Dave Dynasty Show on there. But whatever it means you do listen to us, please make sure you like and subscribe, follow us, share all of our posts, rate and review. All that helps, and we appreciate that support. We had a great weekend this past weekend. Ike and I were in Muncie, Indiana for Delaware County Championship Wrestling. Did some commentary on the live stream of the event. Still working out some of the kinks there. It was our first time doing it, so we've already come up with some things to improve the audio, improve the visual for next month. And we will be there again next month, and you should be too. It will be DCCW Luck of the Draw on Saturday, March 16th in Muncie, Indiana at the Mad Jack's building. And already announced to appear are Haku and Barbarian, the Faces of Fear. So you want to make sure you get to Muncie, Indiana on March 16th and check out that event. And a couple other shows that you might want to check out. New Generation Wrestling has a show in Danville, Indiana on February 23rd. Anyone who buys a pre-sale ticket, $1 of that ticket is donated to the local Little League for their new fields. So go on Facebook, look up Ron Steven Kraft for more information and to purchase those tickets. On March 22nd through 24th, Ike and I will be at C2E2 in Chicago. We will be there if primarily covering the wrestling. I'm primarily going to see Jim Cornette. But there will also be Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks there. But again, I'm there for Cornette. So if you're going to be there, let me know. Maybe we can meet up, say hi. I know they're expecting 100,000 people, so it might be kind of hard. But we will be there. A couple cool shows coming up on Saturday, May 11th. Evolve Wrestling will be in Indianapolis, Indiana. And then in Hanover, Indiana, will be a show that I will be attending, is Supreme Wrestling at the high school there in Hanover, Indiana. The show will feature Jerry the King Lawler, as well as Doug Gilbert, Jason Kincaid, and much, much more, including Jacob the Carpetbagger, who you heard here on the Dave Dynasty Show last week. So get to Hanover, Indiana on May 11th for that show by Supreme Wrestling. As always, remember, you go to PowerSlam.tv, you can sign up and use the promo code DYNASTY and get 1 month free. They have over 100 independent promotions and 4,000 hours of entertainment on there for you. Well worth it, especially for a month free with promo code DYNASTY. So go on there and check that out. So again, we have a great show for you today. These are two interviews that I'm very excited to bring you that I've been working on for a while to try to get these guys on. First, we have Norm Kietzer, formerly of Kietzer Publishing, who published lots of wrestling magazines and programs over the years for a long, long time. Wrestling Review, Wrestling News, and then also programs for pretty much every promotion. And Norm talks all about that. It is a very, very fun interview. He's got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. He's got some great stories to tell. And then the second interview we have today is John Lawson, another guy who has a ton of stories and a ton of experience. His dad was a member of the Indiana Commission, and John ran a newsletter for WWA and a Spike Club for Spike Huber for many years. He's from Terre Haute, Indiana, and he has, again, a lot of stories and knowledge there to share. I'm going to have John on again because he's got so much more to share with us, but we have a great interview with him today. I'm very excited to bring these to you. I want to get right to it. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll have the interview with Norm Kietzer. We'll take another short break, and then you'll have the interview with John Lawson, and then we'll close out the show and send you home. So stick around. If you are looking for the best books, DVDs, and posters on classic wrestling nostalgia, then you want to visit crowbarpress.com. There are literally dozens of titles there, including biographies of the likes of Bruiser Brody, Ole Anderson, Ivan Koloff, and of course, Dick the Bruiser, as we've spoke about here on the Dave Dynasty Show. you want to visit crowbarpress.com for all of your classic wrestling nostalgia needs. Again, that is crowbarpress.com. All right, and welcome to the Dave Dynasty Show. And I am joined today by former wrestling publisher and program printer, Norm Kietzer. Norm, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
All right, thank you for joining us. Talk to us, Norm. How did you first become a pro wrestling fan? What are your first memories of watching pro wrestling?
Oh, I guess when we got television, which might have been the late 40s or early 50s, and there was wrestling from Minneapolis every Tuesday night on WCCO Channel 4. Okay. There were only 2 channels that we got on our TV at that time, 4 and 5.
Okay, and what kind of wrestlers were you watching? Who were some of your favorites when you were watching at that time?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. Going back, I can't remember what year which happened, but I remember Butch Levy was there. He was sometimes an announcer, sometimes a wrestler. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, I heard
Gagne and Namalini showed up. They were from the University of Minnesota at some point.
Sure. But
I can't tell you what year, but I'm guessing late 40s, maybe 1950. But I that's when I first watched wrestling on television.
Yeah. So tell us about your background. What eventually led you to do the writing and the publishing? Did you always kind of have this interest in publishing and writing and stuff? How did you get down that path?
Well, I was involved in promoting wrestling for about 10 years before I got into that.
Okay.
I'll tell you how I got into wrestling. I went to Mankato one day to buy tickets. I would guess I was around 15 years old, 16, something like that. And the promoter asked me if I wanted to get free tickets if I would help carry in and set up the wrestling ring, which was a guy named Joe Snyder, who was a referee, brought the ring down that time. Okay. And we carried in big pieces of plywood. I didn't know what I was doing, but they did, and put together a wrestling ring. This was in the afternoon before the matches.
Sure.
And then I got some money for going and wrestling tickets, and I started doing this off and on regularly. They asked me to sell pictures of the wrestlers at a table in the Mankato Armory, so I did that. I actually went up to some wrestling shows in the Twin Cities and noticed they had programs at the matches. How I got in the program business, I asked Wally Carbo what they did with the unsold programs after a Minneapolis show.
Yeah.
They said they basically threw them out. So I asked them if I could have some of them. So they let me have programs. And what I did was I took them to Mankato, which they knew all about Twin City wrestling anyway, because Mankato got Minneapolis wrestling on TV, that was, and so I used Minneapolis programs and mimeographed off a sheet with the lineup for Mankato.
Right, yeah. So
I started doing that for, several years, and then they were running out of programs, so I started making my own programs for Mankato. And I was working for Harry Camachis, who was the Mankato promoter at that time, and so I started going to a quick print place, I believe it was called, and they printed up programs. I stole a lot of stuff out of the Minneapolis programs when they didn't have extras anymore, I would cut some stories out of that and type up some stories and make up a lineup sheet. And I don't remember if we sold it for a dime or 15 cents or something, That's how I got in the program business. And then my program business expanded because different wrestlers would take copies of my program with them from Mankato.
Okay. Yeah, because you end up doing programs for pretty much, everybody, right? All the way across even to McMahon Senior.
My program business expanded because they would take them to other places. And when Gene Reed in Denver, for example, saw my programs that I was doing for Mankato, he asked me to do programs for Denver. I did programs for Dennis Hilgart in Milwaukee, for Al Tomko in Winnipeg. I'm trying to think. Different people expanded into my program business expanded because people would see my stuff from one place and ask me if I could do stuff for that.
Yeah, right.
And I don't know. Over the years, it expanded some. And
how did that grow into the magazines, like the Wrestling News and the Wrestling Review? Was it just a natural progression, or?
Well, I started sending articles on AWA wrestling to different magazines.
Right. Okay.
And I don't know. At one point, I was still teaching school at the time and promoting wrestling. I had wrestling promotion licenses for South Dakota and Iowa, and I did a lot of maybe 50 different towns in southern Minnesota. I can't tell you. I don't have.
Sure.
But I was involved in promoting my small town spot shows, basically, you called them.
Right, yeah.
And then I was sending magazines, and then how I got really into the magazine business more, I was writing stories for wrestling magazines, but how I got into the publishing business, a guy named Burt Randolph Sugar bought Wrestling Review and some other magazines which I had written stories for before.
Yeah.
And he asked me if I would come to New York and get involved in the working in the office of Wrestling Review.
Sure.
And then I also at the same time had gotten contact from Vince McMahon, not the one you know.
Right, senior, yeah.
The father who asked me if I would start making programs for some of the towns. So I kind of moved to New York, and I pretty soon started doing programs for Boston Garden and Madison Square Garden. And it was kind of different in New York because Vincent McMahon Sr. was the head of the booking office in Washington, D.C., but each of these towns had their own promoters, so I had to work with Abe Ford in Boston and Phil Zackel. What did he have? Baltimore, I think.
Yeah.
Gorilla Monsoon was kind of in charge of Pittsburgh. There's a Jack Witchy who had Providence, Rhode Island. Arnold Scaland, however you say his name, had White Plains, and I think he had something out on Long Island.
Yeah.
Willie Gilzenberg is the one I worked with for doing programs for Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
I can't tell you who owned exactly what was that percentage of what.
Right. Yeah, that's okay. And so
it just kind of expanded over the years.
Right. Yeah. So tell me, at some point, tell me about Jim Melby, because he worked a lot with you, right? And as an editor for some of your magazines and programs. How did you meet Jim Melby?
Jim started doing stuff for me when I was still in Minnesota.
Okay.
He was going to college for a while in Mankato, where I lived, and he worked for me off and on and doing things. One time I was running 2 shows the same night, and he and Marty O'Neill went to the one show, and ran that, and I ran to the other one, you know.
Right.
But after I got out in New York, I had a chance where I could hire somebody to work for me, so I asked Jim, and he was interested, so he moved out to New York, too, and we both worked in the championship sports office. We started and did Wrestling Review, and I started another magazine called Wrestling Monthly for a time.
Sure, yeah.
And things changed over time.
Yeah.
Then Champion Sports, while the wrestling magazines were making money, the boxing magazines lost a ton of money.
Right.
And so they had such a big bill with a printer called Quebecor up in Canada that Quebecor took over the operation, and I quit. They didn't want me, or I didn't want them. I don't know. I moved back to Minnesota.
Yeah.
And by this time, I was doing programs for a lot of different areas.
Right. Yeah, and go ahead.
And Jim worked with me for a while, everything too.
Yeah. Well, you had a lot of guys that contributed when they were young that became names later in the business, like Eddie Gilbert, and particularly a young Jim Cornette. What do you remember about your first contacts with Jim Cornette? Do you remember when he first started submitting pictures and stuff to you? Yeah,
Jim Cornette was a very, very good photographer. He was hanging around the group with running Memphis.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of business with different, not necessarily programs, but selling magazines and that promotion.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you want to go way back, one time when I was working for Harry Camachis, and when Gagne bought into the Minneapolis Wrestling Club, he was going to take over Mankato by himself. So Harry started running his own shows. He got his wrestlers from Roy Welch.
Oh, yep.
And Roy was one of the guys involved in Memphis.
Sure, yeah.
And I remember Buddy Fuller wrestled on our cards then for a short time until Vern decided that it wasn't worth, Mankato wasn't worth having a promotion war.
Yeah.
And went back to us. So that was that's way back.
Yeah.
Anyway, Buddy Fuller was a Welch too.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And he was like one of the main stars that came to Mankato. I can't remember everything.
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, you've done a lot for many years. It's a lot to remember.
And when I came back to Minnesota, I ran a couple cards, but I got out of the running wrestling cards and went into just the programs and magazines more.
Yeah.
Then after I was back in Minnesota, Bert Sugar and Dave DeBuscher, who was a retired basketball player,
right,
bought the Ring Corporation.
Right, yeah.
And so then they had me take, I had the magazine, The Wrestling News, that I had started. So we merged the Ring into the Wrestling News and, kind of had that. And then this company in Canada that had bought Wrestling Review came on hard times, and they bought Wrestling Review and had me. So I kind of merged the two into the Wrestling News, where I had the subscriptions and they had the newsstand distribution.
Yeah.
And for a number of years, we would alternate months, like between Wrestling Review and Ring Wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you remember? In 1982 or so, there was some wrestling trading cards that were put out, the Wrestling All-Stars cards. Those are a big collector's item now. How did that come to be that you put out these trading cards?
Well, basically, the whole idea was actually Vince McMahon, not the one now, but the senior.
Uh-huh.
And he told me to put out a set of we were talking about trading cards, and he said to make it with people from all over the country, not just the WWF, but, from everywhere. And I don't know if you remember back in those days, there was a guy, Joe Blanchard from San Antonio, who got on the USA Network.
Yeah, Southwest Wrestling, yeah.
And they were really concerned, so Vince got to take over the USA spot, Vince Senior.
Yeah, right.
And he at first worked with a lot of other promoters, getting portions from a dozen different TV shows.
Sure, yeah, I remember
that. And then, but actually, I think all along he was thinking of taking over the country.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Yeah.
His son kind of claims that he is the one who originated this, but I think the father is the one who set it up.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
But that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And
those cards are really collectors. It is pretty cool. It's got like wrestlers literally from all the territories.
We did three sets of cards, I remember.
Yeah.
And we sold them at wrestling matches and by mail order and stuff,
Yeah.
So that was another thing we did back then.
Yeah, you did. I mean, yeah, you were somehow involved in a lot of merchandising stuff. Like, I mean, I know there was the Dr. X shirts that were sold through your magazines, and I know maybe you didn't directly sell them, but with the ads and stuff.
Oh, there were different people who had stuff like Dick Beyer had Dr. X shirts. He's the one who sold them, and we just sold them for him.
Yeah.
He's the one who made them. Jim Raschke made shirts. I don't know. Jim Brunzel had a record I think we sold through our stuff. It's hard to remember.
Oh, yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, it's just neat. I mean, those were the days when that's how you found this stuff, was in the magazines and the ads and through mail order. And it was kind of I always liked your magazines.
A lot of this stuff got sold at wrestling arenas too.
Right, sure, of course, yeah. I was always a big fan of your magazines because they seemed to have a lot more meat to them. You know what I mean? They didn't try to really insult our intelligence as fans, and so much. They were a lot more fact filled.
One thing, because of where I came from, my magazines back in the day, I was in the magazine business mainly. There were more than a dozen regional promotions in the United States.
Sure, yeah.
And I did business with a lot of them. And so I tried to cover everything. Right. Prior to that, if you go back to some of the earlier magazines, they were 90% New York-based.
Right, absolutely. Yep.
Stuff. And we had a lot of people who worked for our magazine who got involved in other things.
Sure.
What's his name? Meltzer.
Right, of
started writing stuff for our magazines long before he started his wrestling.
His newsletter. Yeah.
What was it?
The Observer?
It's still around.
Yeah, the Wrestling Observer, yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of people did articles for our magazines.
Yeah. Well, that's what I always love because, I grew up, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Indiana. So, of course, I'm a Dick the Bruiser fan. And this is what I grew up on, this territory. And you didn't read about this area in the other magazines, but you could in your magazines. There was always articles and things in your magazines here with the WWA and everything.
Well, actually, the man I sold my wrestling business to, Brian Bucantis.
Sure, he's from Detroit, right? The Detroit area?
Yeah, he did Stranglehold programs with me.
Sure.
I kind of was a partnership years ago that were in basically it was with the Indianapolis promotion.
Sure, absolutely.
And they ran opposition to the Sheik in
Detroit,
Detroit for a year or two.
Yep.
kind of funny things happen, but
yeah. Well, you're probably familiar with some of our young Indiana photographers those times, like the Scott Romers and the Dave McLean back when they were photographers before, and taking pictures and stuff ringside. And,
right.
Yep.
I think they both took pictures at one time.
Sure. Yeah. So how long did you publish for? When did you finally get out of the publishing business?
Was it 04?
I think so, or something around there. That's when you sold to Brian and completely separate. But you did stay on and kind of help him some, right? And doing some editing and different things.
I wrote stories for him when he was publishing a magazine. He finally quit publishing magazines. He's published a few books off and on.
Yeah, I've got some of his books. Yeah.
Jim Melby did stuff for him too, and Jim had his own little newsletter too.
Sure. Yep. That's right.
Everybody's been gone now for a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you miss wrestling? Are you still a fan at all? Do you miss those being involved in the sport?
I don't follow wrestling religiously at all.
Right. Yeah.
I kind of keep track about people I knew, but they're all dying off.
Yeah. Do you ever make it to any kind of gatherings or conventions or anything like that? I mean, and see some of your old friends or anything?
Well, Kenny J used to have a reunion here in Minnesota. I went to them for about 10 years, but he didn't have one last year.
Yeah.
I haven't been to one maybe for a couple of years.
Yeah.
I went down to Iowa. Let's see, was it
to
Waterloo, Iowa?
Sure, the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, there's one there called Dan Gable's Hall of Fame or something.
Sure, yeah.
And they had a pro wrestling thing. I think they have one every year. I think I went there once.
Yeah.
A few years back. Somebody gave me a ride. I don't really drive out of town anymore.
Yeah.
I'm 76 years old, and I drive a little bit in town here, but that's about it. I'm not in the greatest physical shape I was in once.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And so on. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate you talking to me and taking the time. I mean, and I appreciate everything you did. Like I said, you were, as far as, my life as a wrestling fan, you and your publications were a huge part. And I mean, I still have many of them in my collection put back in storage. But I mean, your magazine, I was a huge fan of your magazines and your work and your publishing. So I mean, I just want to personally thank you for everything you did.
We tried to cover wrestling in a lot of different areas as opposed to thing, but now there are, well, first of all, the WWE wants to be everywhere.
That's right, yep.
And one of the Japanese promotions, I think, is over here off and on with shows.
Yep.
And what else is there? Ring of Honor, are they still around?
Yep, Ring of Honor, yep. There's a couple new groups trying to get started. And I mean, it's
you mentioned, what's his name, McLean. Doesn't he have a girl wrestling thing?
Yep, Women of Wrestling. Yeah, I think they have a TV show that just debuted here recently. Yeah, so he's doing that.
Let me think, there's kind of a smaller promotion here in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. They don't come down to Mankato area, but they're in the Twin Cities. I forget what they're called.
Yeah.
What's his name? The guy who had Bockwinkel's fan club.
Are you talking about Mick Karsh?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mick, yeah.
I think he's the announcer for this.
Oh, are they called Still Domain Wrestling? Is that what it is, maybe?
I think that's it. Yeah, they're around here.
Yeah.
Let me think what's around. There isn't nearly as much wrestling as there used to be in the United States or in Minnesota, for that matter.
No, especially not good wrestling. Yeah.
Well, I don't know what was good wrestling and bad wrestling, and we had some pretty good wrestlers who started out on my cards.
Yep.
When Harley Race started wrestling on my cards, nobody knew who Harley Race was.
Sure, yeah.
And over the years, he became quite famous.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was certainly a hotbed in that area. A lot of talent got started in the Minnesota area.
At one time, Race and Hennig against Bruiser and Crusher drew the biggest crowds ever in Minneapolis history up to that time.
Yep.
But for over a year before Race and Hennig were main eventing in the Twin Cities, I ended up with Race and Hennig on my cards more often than not.
Yeah. That's when I wish there was a lot more, there was some video out there of the Race and Hennig tag team. You hear all these stories about how great they were, and there's just not a lot of video, of their work.
I don't know what's around anymore, and the videotape, what it was you could use the tapes over a lot.
Oh, and it was expensive, so they did. They had to reuse it, So. And who would have ever thought? I mean, they would have never thought that 40 years down the road or whatever, how valuable those shows would have been.
Well, I guess there could have been, but whatever. Yeah. There's probably some around, but who knows what happened to a lot of stuff.
Yep.
And, I don't know.
Yeah. It's a different time, isn't it? So
I can tell you the story about videotapes, when McMahon started running cards, senior on Long Island, what was it, Uniondale or something? I'm trying to think of the name of the building.
Right, yeah.
They had a TV station out on Long Island, so that's when McMahon Jr. was first getting in the business, and so Vince had his son. He was supposed to take the tapes each week to this station out on Long Island.
Right.
But they would make up the tapes maybe 3 or 4 weeks in advance.
Uh-huh.
So Vince Jr., what he did, he took, instead of making the weekly trip like his dad told him, he took like 3 or 4 tapes at once, and he had the dates marked on them.
Yeah.
So guess what happened at that station? And
I'm guessing, did they get out of order?
So McMahon Senior, he talks to me. He says, "Wonder why the show was so down at Uniondale this week?" And I said, "Oh, didn't you know they showed the tape that was supposed to be played the week after the show, the week before?"
Oh no!
And Junior got really mad at me because he had talked to everybody to make sure nobody told his dad about that. But that's one of the reasons I never got along well with him. He was really not happy about me telling his dad. But I didn't even realize, if he'd have told me, I probably would have shut up.
Yeah. That's funny.
I'm just telling you, what stupid things can happen when you're doing things, but whatever.
Yeah.
And, that's way in the past.
Yeah.
And,
that's funny. Well, Norm, thank you for coming on and talking to us and telling us these stories. It's fascinating hearing your experience, and we appreciate everything you've done in wrestling and with wrestling publishing. So thank you for talking to us this evening.
Okay, well, I am not very busy. I enjoyed it. And, well, thank you for talking to me.
Sure.
I enjoy thinking back about things.
Well, good. Yeah, we'll do it again sometime. It was fun talking to you, Norms. You've heard him here on the Dave Dynasty Show as a guest and as host of the monthly Graham's Gallery episodes. And now you can hear his stories. You can own a copy of Confessions of a Big-Time Wrestler, the audio book from Dr. Jerry Graham Jr., former multi-tag team champion in WWA and owner of Bruiser Bedlam. You can hear all of his encounters with the various wrestlers, places, and promotions he's worked as he tells about his colorful, long, and illustrious career. You can have your own copy for only $25, and that includes shipping and handling. It's very simple. Go on Facebook, look up Jerry Jaffe, Jaffe, send him a private message, and make arrangements to purchase a copy of Confessions of a Big-Time Wrestler now. You will not regret this purchase. All right, and we're back on the Dave Dynasty Show. I am your host, Dave Dynasty, and I am joined by a longtime fan, newsletter writer, and just a super fan from Terre Haute, John Lawson. John, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So, John, let's go back. I like to always start and ask somebody what their first memories of wrestling were and when they really kind of got hooked and got the bug.
I would say that I was essentially born into the business. Now, usually, whenever you hear that, you think of someone that may have had a father or a relative that was a wrestler or somehow involved with promotion. Mine was a little bit different in that my father, a number of years before I was even born, became employed by the Indiana State Athletic Commission.
Right.
And as a result of that, he would be an inspector that would have to attend any boxing or wrestling matches that were held within the region that he lived. Living in Terre Haute, he had the south central area that would include Terre Haute, which is Vigo County, and about 6 or 7 counties around that.
Okay.
So as a result of that, from the time that I was born, probably as early as age maybe 2, still in diapers, I know that I had attended matches. I can't pinpoint the exact date of what that was, but it would have been a television taping at the Channel 4 studios, probably around the year, I'm guessing, 1965. I was born in 1963, so it would have been 65, 66, somewhere around in there.
Yeah.
And I can recall going to matches in Indianapolis at the Coliseum, at the fairgrounds, as well as some of their big shows they would have at the Indianapolis Indians ballpark.
Sure.
For outdoor events.
Yeah, and did you attend the shows there in Terre Haute, I'm assuming, as well? Or
I did. Terre Haute was a market that was down in probably the early to mid 60s. I know they did run in the 60s because I can remember one of my dad's favorite stories, not really a favorite story, but a story that he frequently told, was that the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963, there was wrestling scheduled to take place in Terre Haute that day, and he went to the arena, which was the National Guard Armory in Terre Haute, and told the promoter that they would have to cancel their show that night.
Yeah.
And I believe that probably events all over the country were being canceled, so it wasn't that big of a deal. That would have been prior to Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder taking over the territory. That would have been during the Jim Barnett and Bob Gestas days.
Yeah. So now, I hear recently I talked to Larry Hamilton, and he talked to me about his dad, Ralph Hamilton, who ran some of the shows there in Terre Haute and refereed. Were you guys familiar, I'm assuming, with the Hamilton family, right?
Yes. Ralph Hamilton was a mainstay, was a friend of my father's, and he was the local promoter. Wrestling did not take place in Terre Haute probably from, I'd say, 67 until 1970, either the fall of 71 or the fall of 72, whenever Ham, the nickname Ralph Hamilton, and Dick the Bruiser decided to give it a go again, and they put on advertised a show without any TV, other than what would have bled over from the Indianapolis market. For those not familiar with the geography of Indiana, Terre Haute is about 75 miles west of Indianapolis. Yeah. But we're our own TV market. But Channel 4 was an independent station at the time, and it was a strong enough station that you could pick up with an antenna. And then whenever cable TV started to become available in the late 60s, it was one of the stations that was carried by the cable system. So we would get our wrestling that way. The two Terre Haute stations at the time did not carry any pro wrestling. But that very first night, whenever they put on the show at the National Guard Armory, I remember it was standing room only. They had sold all the tickets, and every seat was filled, which there were two sides of the arena that had bleachers. That was completely full for general admission, and then there was folded chairs around all four sides of the ring, and they found some more folding chairs and put them up after more people started coming in, and then found some more chairs and put those up, and then eventually there was not a seat left. It was standing room only, and I was only probably about 8 years old at the time, and I remember having to stand there while my dad was in the dressing room, which was in the basement of the armory, taking care of the paperwork.
Yeah.
And to give you an idea about the commission, the state of Indiana collected a 5% tax on any wrestling or boxing shows that were held. That came off the top of the gate. The promotion required everyone to be licensed, whether you were a wrestler, a promoter, referee, if you were just there to be a wrestling manager. You had to have a license that would be valid for 2 years, and then you'd have to renew it again.
Yeah.
And that was something that was pretty common amongst most of the commission states.
Yeah. Yeah. So did your dad have a good relationship with Bruiser? Did Bruiser have any issues with the commission?
He did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of the time there would be an adversary relationship between any wrestling promotion and the commissions, because promoters want to be able to do what they want without any kind of regulation, just like today businesses want to operate without the government interfering if they can.
Sure, yeah.
And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you're looking at it.
That's right, yeah.
But for whatever reason, when it came to people working for the commission, they seemed to like my dad, whereas a lot of the other people that worked for the commission, they did not.
Yeah.
But he actually became very good friends with Dick the Bruiser, and the other person that he developed a good relationship with in the 50s that he maintained for decades was with the Sheik, and I'm talking about Ed Farhad out of Detroit fame.
Yeah.
For that, which those two, Bruiser and Sheik, never really got along.
Yeah, right.
From stories my dad would tell, that even before each of them were running their own territories in Indianapolis and Detroit, they were battling amongst themselves to be recognized as who was the bigger star amongst them.
Sure.
And that was one of the reasons why they would have periods of time where they did not get along, and then they would make up and would appear on each other's shows, and they'd get mad at each other again. And, and you have that separation, and unfortunately they did get back together again a few times. And some decent houses.
Yeah. So as you're a kid going to these shows, did you ever get recruited to run some tasks or do some odd and end jobs, or were you just purely there as a fan?
I was not necessarily there as a fan, because I got to go to the locker room area and would be a lot of times seated in the back where other wrestlers would bring their either their wife or girlfriend, sometimes their entire family. At the armory, there was a balcony that they did not sell to the general public on one end of the arena.
Okay.
That could hold about maybe 2 rows of 20 seats each. And a lot of times we would be there. That way you're out of the way, and the relatives or friends of both heels and faces could mingle together there, and not be bothered by the fans. It was off limits to them.
Yeah. So when
I would watch the matches, and then a few years later I started taking pictures.
Right.
Of the wrestlers, and that's what led to me starting my own newsletter.
Yeah. So how did you get started taking the pictures? Is it was that just an interest you had? And
yeah, I'd always dabbled in photography and wanted to take pictures of wrestlers more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And it just started off just using a Kodak Instamatic camera that used 126 size film,
mm-hmm.
and then later used a 110 size film camera, which was a really tiny negative, before moving on up to 35 millimeter, which was the standard for many, many years before digital photography.
Yeah, right. Was Bruiser giving you any access to take these pictures, or was this purely something you were doing on your own? Yeah.
When I was really little, my dad would not allow me to be at ringside.
Right, sure, of course.
I had wanted to, or if Bruiser would have allowed it, he wouldn't have allowed it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But by the time I was in my mid-teens, that was fine. But
yeah. So what time period was this?
A lot of times this would have been, I probably started taking my first pictures in around 1974, 75.
Okay. Oh, so I mean that's some peak years there for the WWA there that you were.
It was.
Shooting,
yeah.
It was. Yeah. So,
and,
I mean, were you
shortly after that? I decided that I wanted to do a newsletter because wrestling magazines weren't really giving a whole lot of coverage to the WWA.
Sure, of course,
and neither were the fanzines or the wrestling bulletins or the dirt sheets, as they're often called now. That wasn't a term that I knew about at the time, but it seems. I got hooked on wrestling in '72. It was a short time after that I started looking at some of the ads that would appear in magazines like the Wrestling News and Wrestling Review that advertised fans that were selling their own publications.
Right.
And decided that I would do my own.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned those because I just talked with Norm Kietzer. He said his interview will actually be on the same episode with you. And that's what I said to him, that his magazines are some of the few that gave any attention kind of here to some of the Midwest promotions and stuff. That's why I was always a fan of his magazines. So,
yes, that was the only magazine. He was the only publisher that I ever really wanted to have any of my stories and pictures involved with. Everybody else wanted to get hooked up with the after mags.
Yeah,
I would buy those, but I didn't like them.
Yeah, right.
You didn't really learn a whole lot.
Nope, I don't know
about the wrestlers and the territories from them.
Yeah, so how familiar when you're doing this, when you're taking the photos and getting started in the newsletters, how are you starting to? Is there that get involved in that community with the Cornettes and some of those guys that are also getting started in that time? I mean, were you aware of each other?
Yeah, we were. In fact, I met Jim Cornette in, I believe it would have been February of '77.
Okay.
It was one of the first shows that they'd had at Market Square Arena. Normally the annual shows were being held at the Expo Center.
Right.
But there happened to be the night that Bruiser met the Sheik inside a cage.
Right, yeah.
And Sam Menaker, who was the general manager for Championship Wrestling, as well as the TV announcer, he would take care of us for tickets, and my whole family would go to most of the Indianapolis shows around that time. And for that particular night, they gave us ringside seats that were probably about row 10 or so, which was pretty good.
Yeah.
Especially since they were giving us seats. But seated right behind me as I was taking pictures, and I noticed there was a teenager just a couple of years older than me that was taking pictures, and ended up talking to him, and he mentioned he was from Louisville, and mentioned that he took pictures for the promotion there, and wrote stories for magazines. And I think one thing led to another before he actually introduced himself, or I actually introduced myself. I had to say, "Are you Jim Cornette?" And it turned out it was. He didn't have a driver's license yet either, so his mother drove him and his sister to the matches.
Yeah, right.
And I think they had been a few times, but they became regulars coming to Indianapolis after that. And his mom and sister quit coming a couple years later, but Jim would come with his good friend Norman Dooley.
Right. Yeah.
If you're a fan
that's kind of a newsletter pioneer there, isn't it?
For a long time.
Yeah.
He's from I believe, New Albany or around that area, which is very, very close to Louisville.
Yeah.
So, and Jim lived in Middleton, Kentucky. And Jim and I started exchanging pictures and results with one another from that point on. And then whenever he would come up to the matches in Indy, we would usually talk for a while.
Yeah, I talked with Jim recently. He actually told me he still has all of his copies of your newsletter that he got from that time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because of course I think he has everything. I don't think he's ever gotten rid of anything. But so
that's probably the case.
Yeah,
for myself as well.
Yeah, true.
I have a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So when you started doing the newsletter, was Bruiser aware you were doing it? How long did it take before he found out? Did he have any say in it? Did he care what you were doing?
Well, whenever I started doing the newsletter, I had told my my parents I was going to do it, obviously, and my dad wanted to make sure that that I was the term would be today we would say don't break kayfabe.
Sure,
but,
yeah.
He just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to do anything with the newsletter that would make Bruiser and Snyder mad, or any of the other wrestlers for that matter. So as a result of that, I did not break kayfabe. I just reported what was really taking place at the shows. And, as a result of that, I never had any issues with it at all. So they were aware. I started selling my pictures at the matches, and I would try to sell my newsletter, and very, very few people would buy that.
Yeah.
At the matches, but they would buy a program.
Right.
We had a lineup of the matches, so what I started doing then is typing up whatever the card happened to be for that particular show, and inserting that with it, and then I would sell my newsletters at the matches. And the newsletter evolved a little bit over the years. For its biggest, longest run, I called it Indiana Wrestling Review.
Sure, yeah.
Which Indiana is a combination of Indiana and Illinois.
Yeah. So how long did you do the newsletter? Yeah, how long?
I did it from about 75 to late 81. After I graduated high school and was going into college, I decided I couldn't do it anymore.
Sure.
I didn't have the time for it. And I was also, in addition to doing the general newsletter to cover the WWA, I had also started the Spike Huber fan club.
Yeah, how did that get started? I know when Spike comes in, obviously he was, him and guys like Steve Regal, so they were kind of a breath of fresh air at that time. A lot of the talent was kind of aging, and here's these young guys. Is that what happened? Just Spike caught your eye.
Spike, a lot of people don't know this, but whenever Spike started, he was not called Spike Huber. His real name is Mike Huber.
Yeah,
but
right.
We already had Mike Snyder. So just like in the WWE, that you can't have more than one John because of John Cena.
Yep.
Everybody was having to change their name.
Sure.
Bruiser decided that his soon-to-be son-in-law, who was just at the time engaged to Michelle, he wouldn't be Mike Huber, but he wasn't Spike Huber when he first started wrestling. He was Otto Huber of Germany.
Okay.
And the first couple of matches that he had would be on cards that would have battle royals, and instead of wrestling on the matches underneath, he would just be an extra in the battle royal. Okay. And Terre Haute may have been one of his very, very first matches on a card like that he was an extra. He was the first one being introduced to enter the ring, and I remember he started climbing through the ropes, and I knew who he was, that this was the fiancé of Bruiser's daughter. They introduce him as Otto Huber, and he catches his foot on the middle rope and almost falls.
Oh no!
And he went around the circuit as Otto Huber for a few months, and then they changed his name to Spike, and things picked up for him from there.
Yeah. So
the way the fan club came about was originally I was either going to thinking about doing a Dick the Bruiser fan club, thinking there'd be a lot of people that would be more interested in that than any of the other stars of the WWA.
Sure.
But I was also contemplating having the Paul Christie fan club.
Right. Okay.
And that was because one of the people that I was corresponding with was a man by the name of Bert Prentice.
Okay, sure. Memphis fame.
If you follow wrestling for a long time, he's been involved with a lot of wrestling promotions.
Sure, yeah.
Has done his own. He was in Indianapolis in the mid-'90s, working with Jeff Cohen on a promotion called Championship Wrestling of Indiana.
Sure.
That eventually evolved into Circle City Wrestling.
Right.
That, ran for about 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'd become friends with Bert, and he had mentioned to me that he'd run fan clubs for a number of people, and he'd always been a fan of Paul Christie's and wanted to start one for him. But he lived in Iowa, I think, at the time, and that was outside of the WWA territory, so he never would see him in person. So he had me get Paul Christie to sign a release to let him start the fan club. And Paul signed it, but Bert Prentice never did ever start the club. So
okay.
I thought, well, maybe I'll do it. And then after talking with my dad, he talked to Bruiser, and between the two of them, along with Sim Menninger, they thought, well, this would be a better platform for Spike Huber, an up-and-coming wrestler. Bruiser felt like he didn't need a fan club. He didn't care about it. But this would be a way to get some exposure for Spike. So, so that's how the Spike Huber fan club came about.
Yeah, and so how well did you get to know Spike? Did you get to know him pretty well running the fan club? Or?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Did you have any, when he started running, he kind of ran opposition Bruiser a little bit there. Did you have any, were you around in the scene at all at that time, or?
I don't recall any shows where Spike was actually running them himself. Now, there was an opposition group that did fairly well for a short period of time called the PAWA.
Yes, right, yeah.
The Pro America Wrestling Alliance.
Yeah.
That was run by relatives of Stormy Granzig.
Oh, okay, see, I thought
got involved with.
Okay, because see, I'd always heard Spike, because I know Spike worked some of those shows, so I thought he was the one was kind of behind all that.
No, it was. I believe the man was Stormy's uncle.
Gotcha.
And
okay.
He lived in Chicago or very near Chicago. He was quite a bit older than Stormy, which if Stormy was probably somewhere between 25 and 30, this guy I'd say was probably in his 50s at the time.
Okay.
And it may have been Spike that got him in contact with me, and they'd asked me to help them promote some of their shows by putting up posters. For your younger listeners hearing this today, before there was social media, about the only way that you could advertise wrestling was to buy space in a newspaper, and to also to make posters, 11 by 17, sometimes 12 by 18, or around that size, and you go around to gas stations, bowling alleys, restaurants, what have you, and ask them if they would allow you to put one of those posters up in their window to get the word out. So I had agreed to do that for them while I was in college, and in turn, I'd ask, well, will you give me access to take pictures at the arenas and to also sell pictures? And I didn't want to give a percentage. I always had to give a cut to Bruiser.
Right.
Interestingly enough, I recall from listening to Scott Romer's podcast that you had done with him a year or two ago, that he brought up that he had to pay Dick 20% of everything he sold. Yeah. Well, I guess because of my dad, I got a little sweeter deal. I only had to give 10% of my earnings to Bruiser. And Romer and David McLean and Jeff Cohen, the three photographers out of Indianapolis, they were all aware of that, and they didn't. I wasn't initially selling in Indianapolis. I was just selling in Terre Haute and some of the other spot shows around that those guys weren't even interested in going to. But eventually, I did sell pictures in Indianapolis.
Yeah. So with all your years, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to mention though with the PAWA,
right?
That Stormy Granzig's promotion. Spike was helping them with talent on those shows to get them lined up, And they would they did get TV in Terre Haute. I believe they also had it in Indianapolis for a while, but it ran in Terre Haute longer than it did there.
Yeah.
They would do a half-hour show, and they would do their tapings in French Lick, Indiana,
right,
the resort there.
Yep.
Which French Lick is most famous for being the hometown of basketball great Larry Bird.
Sure. Yep. Right.
Who went on to go to college at Indiana State University, which is here in Terre Haute as well.
Yep.
And but they hired Lou Thez to be their commentator on TV.
Right.
So that gave them some credibility. But they had people that had formerly worked for Bruiser, and then also brought in some other guys from nearby territories. And one interesting name that they had was on those shows. They had somebody called Dick the Bruiser Jr. But this is not the Golden Lion.
Not the Golden Lion.
Fort Wayne.
Okay.
No, this I don't know who this guy was. I never actually saw him in person, but I remember seeing him on TV a few times, and he was a young man of very small stature, but was really muscular.
Huh.
But and the reason Stormy's uncle developed this character was because they were mad that Bruiser was still promoting Stormy Granzik as if he were going to be appearing on WWA shows after he had quit.
Okay.
So to get back at Bruiser, they created a Dick the Bruiser Jr. and put him on TV. I guess they thought it was to poke fun at Bruiser, but they didn't really understand the concept quite so well, because they weren't making him out to be a jobber. They were actually having him go over people on TV.
That is interesting.
I never did find out who he was. I think I asked Spike about it one time after this PAWA group started running in Terre Haute, and I think he just said, "Oh, he was some guy they just put the name on." But he didn't even really know who he was either.
That's fun. That's wild.
At that point, so he probably just didn't care.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. So, with all your years,
I've got a VHS tape of that group. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said of all your years of attending, with your dad being on the commission and you doing the newsletter and everything else. What are some of the? I know you shared a few, but what are some of the top memories of being at these shows that jump out at you? That really, when you look back, really jump out at you.
One takes me back to that card at Market Square Arena where I met Cornette.
Yeah, okay.
For the first time.
Sure.
When Bruiser was wrestling the Sheik.
Uh-huh.
And my dad had been back in the dressing room. He wasn't working in an official capacity for the commission that day, but he could still have access with his badge to go back there. And he had come out, and after talking to Sheik and talking to Bruiser, Sheik had decided that he was going to bring his snake out to the ring. And I don't think that was something he had done previous to this time, at least in Indianapolis.
Right.
And Bruiser saw that he had the snake, and he had decided that what he wanted to do was, after they got in the ring, they would kind of go at it for a little while before the match would start.
Uh-huh.
He wanted to get a hold of the snake, and he said he was going to rip it in two.
Gosh. Oh, man. Yeah.
And that does sound like something Bruiser would at least say,
sure.
And maybe he would even do it, too.
Yeah.
So Sheik got wind of that. I don't know if Bruiser told him that, or maybe my dad may have been the one that told him that, but I can remember whenever the Sheik came out to the ring first with his manager, Eddie Creechman,
uh-huh.
He had the snake with him, and he put it on the ring ropes after he got inside the cage. And the snake's all crawling around there. But before Bruiser came out, he took care of the snake and had it removed from the ring. So it was already outside of the cage before Bruiser entered the ring. So he could not hurt the snake.
Oh, that is funny.
So that really stands out.
Yeah.
But, there were so many big matches. I at a young age became a big fan of heels, the Chain Gang.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Fabulous Kangaroos.
Yeah.
Al Costello and Don Kent.
Absolutely.
I thought they were really cool. And then, of course, in the early 70s, I really became a big fan of the Valiant brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy came to the territory first, and I just loved his work. Loved him working with Bobby. We knew him just as Pretty Boy Bobby Heenan. That was
Sure.
before he became the Brain.
Right. Yep.
And just thought that Heenan was just the epitome of being a heel. He could do so little to get major reactions out of people, but then whenever he would do something major, the buildings would just erupt.
Yeah.
And he a lot of times would have to have security on all four sides of him before he could exit the ring to go back to the dressing room. But there were a lot of matches. Bruiser and Crusher, the tag team, was great. Having the likes of Baron Von Raschke, Cowboy Bob Ellis,
Yeah.
the Fabulous Ox Baker.
Yep.
They were great. Guy Mitchell was an interesting guy. He had so many characters.
Sure. Yeah.
Working in this area, he was
Eventually one of the Valiant brothers.
Tag team assassins.
Yeah.
Then he was gone for a while. He came back with a mask as the Masked Strangler, and even helped the singles title here.
Yep.
Then he would go away and wrestle in Canada for a while, and he'd come back, and he became Madman Mitchell. I didn't really care for that character.
Yeah.
They even dropped his first name of Guy. He was just Madman Mitchell, which he didn't really look like a madman, and he didn't wrestle like a madman.
Yeah.
And he had put on a lot of weight at that time, and then ultimately became Gentleman Jerry Valiant.
Yep.
And,
Sure.
as much as I liked the Valiants, and as much as I liked him, I didn't really think that he fit in that well as being a Valiant brother as Jimmy and Johnny did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, John, we appreciate you coming on. I think we'll have to do this again. I think you've just got so many stories. I think we'll have to have you on again sometime and do another part of this and pick your brain some more. But I think we've kept you for a while, and I think we'll call it here. But I appreciate you taking the time and talking with us and sharing your stories.
Pleasure's all mine.
Yeah. So, like I said, we'll make arrangements. We'll have you on again and here's some more stories for you. But thank you very much for coming on, John. And
you're quite welcome.
All right, welcome back. Thank you for joining. Thank you to Norm Kietzer and John Lawson for joining us. Again, 2 interviews I've been wanting to bring to you for a long time, and I'm very excited we got to do that today. I plan to have John on again, like I said. He's got a lot more information, a lot more stories to share. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you'll share this episode, help spread the word, get these stories out there. These guys deserve to be heard. The Midwest wrestling history deserves to be told, so make sure you share this and help spread the word. There's other ways that you can help support the show. We bring you this show every week for free, and you can make contributions to help to the show. You can go to paypal.me/The Dave Dynasty and make a one-time contribution, or you can go to patreon.com/The Dave Dynasty and make an ongoing monthly contribution. Everything helps, even if it's just a couple bucks. It helps with all of our services, our hostings, equipment, and etc. So please get out there, support, help us keep this show free. Or you can go to PROWRESTLINGTEES.com/The Dave Dynasty and buy a shirt. That also helps. If you'd also like to use our affiliate links, go to Amazon.com or HighSpots.com. You can go to DaveDynasty.com and find those links or those buttons there. That was very confusing. Just go to DaveDynasty.com. There's buttons there for Amazon and HighSpots. You can go there, do your shopping. No additional charge to you, but we get a little bit of kickback, and it helps us out. Also, if you go to DaveDynasty.com, there are the buttons there for the Patreon and PayPal to make those contributions, as well as links to all of our social media. So make sure you follow us on all of those. We hope you enjoyed this show as much as I did, as much as I enjoyed talking to Norm and John. It was a blast, and I look forward to doing it again. Give us some feedback, give us some comments, let us know what you thought and what you want to hear in the future. We appreciate that. We're going to get out of here. So until next week, I am Dave Dynasty. This is the Dave Dynasty Show. Be good, be safe, and keep on growing.